For those of you that don't know, Josh has accomplished a lot. He co-founded Garage Games, one of the largest gaming development companies at the time, which was the precursor of Unity. And thanks again for helping us. Without you, CESC wouldn't have happened. So just another shout out. And Guido, thank you so much for organizing one of the stages for day one of CESC again. And your team has definitely done some of the most phenomenal research in crypto economics. So I think we're going to have a really good discussion about games and crypto economics today. Can you guys give like a more thorough introduction of yourselves?
Sure. Just before I get into my intro, I also want to thank Steven and Ronan and John and Howard and the whole team for, not everybody knows the story, but they actually, to make CESC happen, did a hugely heroic effort, including diving into a burning storage container to pick up some materials for the conference. There was a fire in the East Bay where it was stored. So you guys did a really phenomenal job. And CESC, I think, along with Epicenter and Blockchain Week in general, is just such a valuable thing for the community. So really appreciate your guys' efforts and Prysm groups too. Quick background, I've been building technology companies for about 20 years. Started my first company straight out of high school. Had no idea what I was doing, but it was in fintech. We created, at the time, the world's largest database and automated analysis system for derivatives in the world. We grew it to a really big size, sold data streams basically to hedge funds, institutions, market makers, so capital markets, kind of fintech background. After we sold that company, jumped to Garage Games, which, as Steven said, was at the time the world's largest game development platform. It was really kind of at the cusp of the transition in games from retail distribution of boxed products with a very consolidated, centralized set of a handful of publishers that really controlled the market, to the real diffusion of the industry with the explosion of game developers, distribution on the internet, and right alongside that, the evolution of the industry's business model to digital purchases, digital goods, and ultimately the free-to-play model. Garage Games also, grew really big. We sold it in 2007. And since then, mostly been investing in different technology companies, helping friends with some of their companies. I got to know Kevin, who's one of the co-founders at at Forte through his previous company, Kabam, which is one of the leading free-to-play game companies. I was an investor, shareholder there, and was really impressed with Kevin and the job Kabam did in navigating a totally new business model in games, which is, I think, what's about to happen again with the introduction of blockchain and blockchain gaming. So that's me.
So very quick background. I'm the managing partner at Prysm Group. We are an economic consulting firm based in New York. We were founded a couple of years ago by a group of our trade economists, and we have grown the firm. We have in our team the former chief economist at Microsoft, a Nobel Prize-winning economist who was a professor at Harvard University. We just announced earlier this week at the Crypto Economic Security Conference, and again, thank you, Josh, for making that happen. We announced a new initiative that is spearheaded by Professor Ben Holstrom at MIT, who co-won the Nobel Prize in Economics with Oliver Hart, who was our senior advisor, and Preston McAfee. And it's targeting producing more economic research, bringing more economists into the fold of the blockchain sector. Now, with regards to blockchain and gaming, we are very bullish on the sector. We work across many different industries, healthcare, financial services, and gaming is where we think there is going to be that early adoption beyond crypto people. And I'm sure we're going to go into the panel, and there are many reasons why. And if we think about the type of work we do, thinking about how to create economies, how to create a currency that's going to subsidize certain behavior, the role of non-fungible tokens, blockchain games have all of these components, and there are different views on what's going to be more valuable, where you're going to unlock value, what are going to be the incentives for people to shift towards blockchain-based games, and we're going to get into it in the next few minutes.
Awesome, thanks guys. You know, let's dive straight into gaming. I used to be a professional gamer quite a while ago, and I've basically played every single game format you can think of, like FPS, RTS, RPG, MMO, and you know, can you sort of give some color into like what crypto economics is most relevant for? Which game format? Is there a specific one where it thrives the best?
Yeah, it's a good question. I really think it will, if game developers start to adopt blockchain and tokenized assets and create equivalents to, you know, the real world kind of free market economy in their virtual worlds, I think that will transform actually the whole industry. It really would impact most every genre. That said, there's some kind of obvious places where it can start, and that's, you know, one of the things we think about a lot at Forte is, you know, many games already have marketplace-driven economies where there's a degree of freedom for players to trade with each other, you know, through an auction house in an MMO, for example, or to specialize in, you know, different roles in a game and create, you know, kind of an economy amongst themselves. There's also games that have, you know, large secondary markets, gray markets, black markets, where players, because they so want to be able to trade with each other, even in ways oftentimes that developers don't allow because they don't know how to control it or design around it, it still happens. And so it's a huge market around that. So, you know, I think you'll start to see it happen in those sorts of games where there's already a marketplace economy or already a large, you know, kind of secondary economy, whether it's official or unofficial first. And once it starts to take off, the game industry, you know, over and over has proven that when a model starts to work, developers are really early adopters. They adapt very quickly. And so, you know, you'll see it spread through the industry. That's what happened with free-to-play, you know, and kind of driving the industry from maybe 100 million gamers 15 years ago to 2.4 billion gamers now. So I think it will happen. It will be slow at first and then all at once.
Yeah, and I second Josh's comments. We think, you know, from an economic standpoint, it's like where are the incentives going to be stronger for gamers to be attracted to the benefits of blockchain? We think about blockchain as, you know, giving you certain property rights on the assets that you create, right? The assets are no longer owned technically by the developing house. You own them. So definitely places where you do already have that phenomenon. As Josh said, maybe it's off game and not really approved by the developer, but, you know, this has been going on for a long time. And those are going to be the areas like, you know, marketplace games where we think this is going to happen. The interesting thing to, you know, how we think that the industry is going to shift, when we think about the macroeconomics aspect of the gaming industry, you have to consider that about 10% of games in the last 20 years have done 90% of the revenue. So to Josh's comment, as soon as we have one hit, you're going to see a lot of copycats and a very big, quick shift towards blockchain-based gaming. So that's it.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. And I definitely want to ask, like, you know, when you talk about these games, and there's a lot of these challenges with how we move forward with fighting. I don't want to say fighting these like more centralized companies. You just mentioned, you know, 10%, 10 games own 90% of the market share, right? So like, how do we move forward in which, you know, all these more centralized corporations, companies, they want a more closed system. Mm-hmm. They want all the revenue to themselves.
Yeah.
So how do we like go in a different direction and make things more decentralized? Start building like a community where people are actually contributing and getting rewarded for it.
Yeah. So games is not unlike many other industries where the biggest, most established, most entrenched players in a space aren't the first to adopt some disruptive technology, right? It's an innovator's dilemma where, you know, they're sitting pretty in the industry today. But games is somewhat different from many other industries in that it's not totally consolidated. Again, thanks to kind of the decentralization of the internet itself and the ability to reach consumers directly with games. There are tens of thousands of game studios, you know, around the world where they desperately want to find, you know, a new model that can help them, succeed in a market that's largely consolidated, and that's happened as often as it does repeatedly in the games industry over the last 10 or 15 years in free to play, where it's really consolidated again to a handful of companies that really sit at the top of the market. So the big promise for many developers around the world is that blockchain can enable new game designs that players really, to Guido's points, engage with and feel more agency in, that they really care about, and that gives them a new vector to grow. And then, what happens with the big companies is you'll see a smaller game take off, and they'll either copy it or buy it. But once the model starts to be proven out, or they'll be displaced. But once the model starts to be proven out, it catches fire. And the great thing about this is because the whole change that's driven by tokenizing assets, enabling player-to-player economies, the change that's driven is that the players start to own a piece of the game. It's not just the developer. It's really a network of participants. The developer is one of the network participants that, and we think the models that will win over time are those that really treat, that just define a protocol with incentives that the developer adheres to, the players adhere to, and that model, gives everyone more agency and ultimately leads to a bigger marketplace.
Yeah, and I think to add on that, when we think about what is it going to take for a shift, what is it going to take for people to really start noticing, maybe a small studio. So we're talking about people having property rights and being able to have a stream of income from their game. And sometimes we get asked, okay, is it going to be like alternative to having a job? And we don't think about it from that standpoint, but really it's going to be additional income in the gig economy that we are anyway moving towards. And when we think about the numbers, you don't have to provide thousands of dollars of value to gamers. The average household income for a family of 4 in the US, 2018 is $54,000. So just a few additional dollars every week is going to make an impact, and it's going to drive incentives for people to take this very seriously. And so I think going back to my previous point, as soon as you have one hit, to Josh's point, every big house is going to take notice and either are going to acquire these smaller shops or try to copy paste the model, onto their existing networks.
Yeah, and just to build on that a little bit, to Guido's point, it's right on. It kind of demonstrates how massive the opportunity is in creating these peer-to-peer, or what we call community economies in games. If someone earns $100 a week from just doing what they love, playing a game, by either specializing in something in the game, or being really good at it, or doing tasks that others don't want to do, helping their clanmates, whatever it may be, that's like $4,000 or $5,000 a year. And if you had a game with just 1 million players, which is not a large game. There's games with hundreds of millions of players a month, where you had 1 million players doing that. That's a $4 or $5 billion a year game, which would be the biggest game that there is, right? So you can see even a small game could create a massive economy by starting to incorporate these things. And if that happens, we think when it happens, it'll just drive massive change in the industry.
And to build on Josh's point, this has already happened in Second Life years ago. It was actually interesting. A lot of economists look at Second Life, how people specialize in providing specific services. They built like a mill that was providing the flour, in the game. And of course, in that case, they made all the income in Linden dollar, which was the native currency, and they couldn't really cash it out. But in this case, it will be made, in tokens that you can bring off to an exchange and actually cash them for fiat. So, the model has already been looked at. Of course, you were still trapped by the fact that Second Life was owned by a publishing company, right?
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
Yeah.
So a lot of people talk about crypto just being a monetary medium of exchange for games. So essentially, tokens are for buying things on the digital gaming marketplace. But personally, I feel like there's a lot more to it. And there's ways in which you can involve the community, where essentially there's game developers contributing more content creators, which is very important for gaming, right? So like, can you sort of talk about how that ecosystem looks like, and yeah, and some of the challenges that we may face?
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people, when they begin thinking about blockchain and gaming, they stop, as you said, at kind of, oh, there's a currency, and you just use it to pay for things in the game. Or the next step is they stop at NFTs. You know, it's a collectible item. It's totally unique. Wouldn't that be valuable? And they're right. You know, those things could be valuable. But the real, the thing that will really unlock massive change is when the virtual worlds in games, again, start to reflect like real world economies, where people can specialize, where people can trade with each other, where people can pay each other for services. When you do that, then, you know, yes, there'll be a currency, you know, and games already have virtual currencies, but it's not a medium of exchange. It's just like our real world, where there are, you know, currencies that people use simply for convenience, so they don't have to barter. You know, it just expands the size of the economy. It's really the underlying services and goods in the economy that drive the economy size, not, you know, the particularities of the currency itself. And same thing for NFTs. There are unique items in the real world today that, you know, can have a collectible value, but they're a small portion of the overall economy. And so we think, you know, it will be exactly analogous in virtual worlds. It's really difficult to figure out how to do that, how to do it at scale, right? You can have games with, an individual game can have multiple currencies and potentially thousands of asset types, you know? So how do you create, if that's just one game, how do you bootstrap a liquid market where players know what things are worth? How do you provide liquidity in that marketplace? How do you do that across, you know, a network of hundreds or thousands of games, right? The combinatorics are daunting. And that's something we've spent a lot of time on. And you know, we've learned a lot from the space in general. Folks like Guido and Stephanie and Kathy at Prysm Group, and, you know, others in the space, and kind of figure out how do we create these liquid marketplaces that create a great game experience for players, but also a thriving, vibrant market. And somebody's going to have to figure all that out to really unlock this.
Yeah, and I think, to build on Josh's point, there are sort of two things we think about from an economic standpoint. The first one is the value is going to be that players are going to be able to make a relationship-specific investment to the game, knowing that they're going to have the property rights on the goods and whatever thing that they create in the game, right? This is going to be their own. And we know that ownership is the biggest driver of incentives, right? If you own something, you're going to really care of it, and you're going to invest in it. So that's one thing. Then to Josh's point, though, you know, what are going to be the elements that are going to be important so that there is actually a functioning marketplace? And one of which is, you know, to build on this issue that there's going to be thousands and thousands of NFTs, different currencies. It's important to think about what are going to be what we call the economics of information in this game. So for example, if everybody starts producing NFTs and also unique, how do I know what their value is, right? So is there any way to have posted prices or indication about pricing? And this is not so different from, for example, to the way eBay managed to figure out how to bootstrap their marketplace. Or in eBay, you know, you have lots of different items, and you might not know, okay, what is actually the price I should pay? And so eBay gives an indication, if you post something, okay, this might be the value for it. So we're going to probably see similar, and they're going to be sometimes algorithmically priced or based on, you know, past history once you have, you know, a certain recurrence of sales. And the way you design these elements are going to basically lead to either a functioning marketplace where, you know, buyers and sellers can match efficiently and trade, or marketplaces where, unfortunately, you know, maybe the cost of search is too high because, you know, I don't want to spend so much time as a buyer in identifying all the specific characteristics of this unique item and figure out, you know, is the seller selling me to a good price or a bad price, right? So there's going to be a lot of elements in the economic design that are going to be really essential, and they're going to sort of, you know, be the difference between getting it right and having millions of users and getting it wrong and, you know, ending as many games before, not really with adoption.
That's right.
Thanks, guys. Josh, can you like elaborate a bit on, you know, what Forte does and how, I don't want to say change, but how it's adding value to the gaming industry?
Sure.
And Guido, can you also elaborate, given how early games are right now, given how early games are in crypto right now, research is very important.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about, you know, the research your team is doing in crypto economics, specifically related to games?
Sure. So quickly on Forte, when we go and talk to developers, many of them, especially those with existing marketplace economies or gray markets, black markets, have already been interested in incorporating token economies and assets that live on blockchains into their games, giving their players more agency and ownership, and really creating a thriving economy around that, which has been actually pleasantly surprising to see. But they're all just daunted by the technology. How do you make it scale? How do you design an economy around this? And bear in mind that free-to-play game developers are actually excellent economy designers. They've just become accustomed to doing it in kind of a command and control economic model. So it's daunting to figure out how to really open it up for players to have the ownership and agency that Guido was talking about. So we try to help with both those things. Forte provides an SDK, basically, provides a platform for developers to easily incorporate assets that live on blockchains and anchor to public layer 1 ledgers, and also to design their economies to incorporate with either an existing game or to design from the ground up for a full community economy, a full peer-to-peer economy. So we really try to focus on those two things and just make it easier for developers to design it and then to deploy it and scale it.
So to your question, Stephen, we have seen a lot of research done on general gaming economies, right? So economies have been looking at games for a long time, for many of the reasons Josh just mentioned. We think that the aspect that blockchain brings is really this property rights one, and it's going to drive a whole new set of incentives, right, for people. We have launched earlier this week this research initiative to bring more PhD economics students into ventures, and we're looking to place some of them in blockchain gaming companies to start testing, doing applied research and A/B testing on some of the assumptions that we have, thought of it at the theoretical level. And the cool thing with games is that you can see results very quickly, right? Because there's thousands of people interact with the game any minute, so you can, really do an A/B test and see actually how does this drive more adoption or more, more contribution from the gamer. So this is, the right, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we're very bullish on the gaming industry also for this ability to quickly interact and get feedback, which, if you think about, pharma or others, it's much slower, the cycle, so you can iterate, at a much slower pace, which, leads to worse results.
Mm-hmm. We're a bit over on time. In 30 seconds from each of you, if we could fully utilize and leverage the potential like crypto economics in games today, how's it going to look like? Let's say for a game like Fortnite.
Yeah. I mean, whatever the game is, what's really cool if you can fully realize this is that people could, again, have more ownership and agency in the games that they already love. If you take that further, it would allow you to focus on the parts of the games that you really like, because you could just trade with players for other things, and actually to start to earn an income from just doing what you love. As a person, if you're a gamer or you're really into a particular game or genre, and I think that's just awesome. That's a big part of what motivates us to help figure this out. I think it's increasingly important too, in the world where you see, just in general, people, with the creator economy, trying to really figure out how to make a living from their passions. And it's increasingly important in a world of automation and increasing inequity. It's a really cool thing to try to enable. I think games will be it's all powered by blockchain, but games could be a great adoption vector for it. So sorry, that was much more than 30 seconds.
So I think what we hope is going to happen is that everybody's going to become a prosumer, a producer and consumer of games. And to Josh's point, you're going to be able to really get a stream of income. And even if, again, as we mentioned, $100 a week is going to make a significant difference to the average US family. And you're going to see this as part of the overall gig economy, right? Years ago, it would have been unthinkable that you would earn money driving your car with passengers that you don't know in the back. There's about 2.3 million Americans who do this on a weekly basis now. So the shift happens and happens quickly as soon as people figure out, okay, this can really make a difference in my life. And again, we're going to go towards a market where people receive income from many different streams, and why not gaming, since people value actually games a lot and dedicate a lot of time and resources to them. So that's the hope.
Awesome. I look forward to it. Well, that's all the time we had. Thanks, guys. And I definitely think we should do a podcast about this, because there's a few hours of discussion that we should have.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.